Three, two, one. Hey, Buzzhead, Shagheads, and Zwinkers. Curtis Tucker, a.k.a. Shags, here with another episode of the Curtis Tucker Podcast, coming to you from Shaggy Duck Studio. You can see in the background, if you guys are listening on your favorite podcasting app, I greatly appreciate that. Please subscribe to the podcast, and then you'll know every time I release a new episode. If you're watching on the website or the YouTube channel, I am waving at you. You can see the magnificent 70s vibed, groovy Shaggy Duck Studio in the background where I do my recording these days. And I got little Mr. Saucy Pants down here on the floor. He's taking a nap. It is a beautiful, sunny, warm day here in Enid, Oklahoma. And so I thought I would, this is kind of a rambling podcast episode. It's kind of a combination of a bunch of stuff. I recently had been working on a project that kind of has fizzled, and thinking about life in the third trimester, and thinking about how do I define myself now that I'm over 60? And so I thought, well, let me kind of put all that into a bucket and shake it up and try to do an episode. And so I've got some notes here that I may have to look at, and but that kind of is going to try to keep me on track. I may end up rambling anyway. But you guys hit me up at curtis@curtistucker.com or shags@shaggyduck.com. Let me know what you think. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me where you're watching from. Give me some show ideas. The show ideas really help me out. I really appreciate you guys. And I like the fact that I know you guys are out there. So thanks for being here. And this, again, like I said, this episode is going to be a little more personal, a little more reflective. It's going to be about something that I recently experienced that I'm not going to get into details because it doesn't really matter. That's not the point of the podcast. The podcast is more about, got me thinking. It's really got me thinking. So let me get into it. So I recently kind of took a swing at a project, and just to define a project, what I mean by a project is almost every, Enid Buzz is like my business, but everything else, and even kind of stuff related to Enid Buzz, is kind of like everything's freelance. I do things freelance. And so I don't like work for a client, or I don't have a boss or a company that I work for. So I try a lot of different things that might be a little outside of what I normally do, and I kind of do those on like a freelance basis. And so what project that I was trying to work on recently, something a little more unusual, something a little unexpected that I wasn't really thinking I was going to be working on. It's something that I never would have predicted that I would even been considered for at my age, but I put myself out there. I said, hey, pick me, let me do the project. And in effect, I was saying, hey, why not me? Well, even at 63, I can, compete in trying to get this project just as well as anybody else. And for a little while, it looked like it might be something that would have turned into a really cool project that would have been fun. And like I say, these are, short-term freelance project. It's not like a new job. So don't think that I was applying for a new job. But it didn't pan out, didn't work out. But as weird as it sounds, I'm glad that I took a shot and tried to get it. Because the whole experience made me stop and think about the questions that I hadn't seriously asked myself in a long time. Questions like, who am I, really? What makes me interesting? What stories from my life actually define me? How would I describe myself to a room full of strangers who know absolutely nothing about me? What makes what makes you guys memorable? And maybe the biggest question of all, do we underestimate our own story because we've been living inside it for too long? Which I do. And that's why I'm going to talk to you guys today. It's not the project itself, but it's what happens when an opportunity comes along, even one that doesn't work out, that makes you look at your life with fresh eyes, especially if you're over 60 we're in our third trimester of life here. And also why I think it matters, especially as we get older, that we still say yes to things that are a little outside of our normal lane. We're not too old, people. If you're feeling too old, you gotta get with it. So I'm going to tell you right up front that I am 63 years old. I'm not interested in slowly fading away as a spectator in the rest of my life. I'm like ready to start some new stuff. And so for probably the next 10 or 20 years, I'm going to be going for the gusto. So get prepared if you're following me. And that'll be one reason you want to continue to watch and listen to this podcast. Most days are pretty ordinary. We wake up, we got routines, we answer emails, we feed our animals, we scroll, we watch TikToks and all that stuff. And we wander into a room and wonder why we're in that room. It's just basically regular life. And then every once in a while, something shows up that makes you sit up a little bit straighter. An unexpected email from somebody, a surprising phone call, a message from someone you didn't expect to hear from, a chance to be considered for something that you weren't really prepared for, a possibility, not a guarantee, not a promise, just a possibility. And if you're over your 60s, that's kind of cool for those little things to come along. Sometimes a possibility is enough to send your imagination into orbit, and that's what happened to me. So that door to an opportunity cracked open, and not wide enough for me to jump in and say, okay, I got it, I've secured this, but wide enough for me to look inside. And once I looked inside, my brain just went crazy, and I was like, where could this go? It just had all kinds of possibilities, which is pretty cool because that doesn't happen to us a lot. I started picturing, how's this going to unfold? I wonder what it could feel like, what it would be like. What did my family and friends think if I worked on this project? What would people be saying? What would I be saying? What surprises would be around each corner? Different projects sometimes take you completely out of your regular routine, and that can be pretty exciting, but it can also be kind of uncomfortable, which then I started thinking, is this a project that I really want to work on? It's so different than what I normally do that, am I, really going to be fit for that? As soon as you let yourself hope a little bit, you also explore a little bit of disappointment. That is a deal we make when we allow ourselves to want something. And I think a lot of people, maybe most people, spend a good chunk of their lives trying to avoid that feeling. So a lot of people don't go for things, or they don't try for things, or they don't start businesses because of that disappointment. But, I kind of don't mind that. I've had businesses fail. I've had things not work out, but I continue to go for it. A lot of people would rather not try. They would rather not give it a shot and see what happens. And I get that. I mean, I know a lot of people are comfortable with just living their lives, but man, you guys, we got a lot of life left at 60. So, and nobody enjoys rejection. I don't enjoy rejection. Nobody enjoys waiting, wondering if you're going to be a part of a project or not. Nobody enjoys waiting on a phone call or an email or a confirmation that everything's going to work out. And the anticipation, though, and your mind wandering can really wake you up and make you think, wow, my life could be completely different overnight if I did this one thing, or if I tried this one thing. And so I want you guys to think about that. I want you to don't get comfortable with what you're doing. I want you guys to feel like you're still in the game. Everybody needs to continue to stay curious. We got to be able to get out there and surprise ourselves with things that we might be able to do. And some part of us still believes that there might be a left turn out there that we've never taken that we can take. And frankly, that's what I'm all about. Those are the things that I do. I like that I did not automatically dismiss this opportunity, that I thought there was a chance. I like the fact that I didn't say, hey, I'm too old, I could never do that, why bother? I wouldn't be considered for that project. I like the fact that I stepped forward and I went for it. Even though it didn't work out, it still, for a couple of weeks, I was like, wow. And that's part of what this episode is about, is that wow. One of the most fascinating parts of the whole experience was that it forced me to think about myself from the outside, which is an odd thing to do. Most of us are very familiar with our internal selves. We know our fears, our habits, songs that make us emotional. We know our history, what cereals we ate as a kid. We know what stories that we've told 100 times. We know the things that embarrassed us back in the day and that everybody else has forgotten, but we know all that, and it's all internal. But describing ourselves in a way that makes sense to someone who doesn't know us, now that's pretty hard. And that's what this project made me think. And then all of a sudden I realized, wow, that's a little bit harder to do than what you might think. There's a difference between answering, what do you do, versus who are you? If somebody asks me what I do, I can answer that. I do Enid Buzz. I create media. I podcast. I design. I make t-shirts. I build things. I promote things. I tell stories. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a dad, all that stuff. That's the easy part. And I think we all can do that. But if somebody asks, what makes you different? What would people remember about you? What moments in your life reveal your character? What makes you worth paying attention to? That gets real fast. And that's where you kind of start thinking, what would my answers be to those questions? Because now you're not just listing things on a resume. Now you're trying to identify your essence, basically, who are you? And I'll tell you that it's not as easy as you would think. You start mentally going through your whole life like you're rummaging through an attic, and you kind of start thinking about, would this story define this is me? Would that story define this is me? Is it that I grew up in the 70s and I have a vivid imagination to remember riding my bike around the neighborhood? Is it that I've always been drawn to making things and creating things like cartoons and websites? Is it that I've spent years building, social media businesses and things like that? Is it that I can be nostalgic on 1 minute and then talking about AI the next minute, thinking about the future? Is it that I always had this urge to turn regular life into a story, like writing my book? Maybe it's all of that. And maybe that's the point. It's not one thing. We're not our job title. We're not our age. I can't be defined because I'm 63, although that puts me in a category. We're not our most recent success or our most recent failure. We are a collection of all those stories, all those quirks, scars, jokes, opinions, choices, influences, and that's what all makes us each unique and an individual. So I want you guys, especially if you're over 60, in your late 50s or over 60, start thinking about what cool stories do you have? What has all come together to make you who you are? And then when an opportunity comes along that asks you to present yourself, you suddenly realize that you've lived a pretty cool life. Not perfect, not a famous movie star like life, not a life without mistakes, but a cool, full life. A strange one in places, a funny one in places, and a meaningful one in places. And I think for many of us, we forget that we've got these really unique stories that have all led to who we are today. We just got to remember that not everybody knows our stories. Here's something that I have come to believe after all this process and everything. The stories that feel ordinary to us are often the exact stories that make other people lean into us. And I understand that because when I give speeches and I tell the story of how I went from, being an employee to creating, the companies that I've created, it seems super routine and super easy because I did it and it worked out. But people that listen are kind of like fascinated and they're like, man, I don't think I could have ever done that. So we've got to remember that we've lived these stories and we've stopped noticing how unique and unusual they are. To me, building Enid Buzz over the years has become just a part of my daily life. It's my routine. I post pictures, I post messages and stories and local happenings every day. Almost the same thing every day, almost the same things every year. But if I step back and I look at it and I look at what I'm doing, it's kind of unique and unusual that I've created this myself and I do it on my own. Nobody's, pushing me along. I push myself along this whole time. For over 20 years, I've been doing this. That's not nothing. And that's a story. And that's a big part of my story. I've worked doing other things. I've interviewed people. I've done things on television. I've been in movies. I've created brands out of little ideas. I'm writing the Banana Seat Squad. I connect all of our old friends from West Broadway and try to present what it felt like living back there. And all those are stories that I lived. And even the tornado footage that I got the other day, that was a moment that I was documenting something for the community, but that turned out to be a pretty cool story. And for me, that's what I'm always looking for. What could be the next story? What could be the next interesting thing in my life that I can tell people about? And chasing tornadoes is definitely one of those things. And yet, if someone asks me casually, what is interesting about you? My first instinct might be to still shrug and say, I don't know. I just do my thing. That's how I think we all are. We normalize everything that we do and don't think of it as being unique. We live inside our own little habits and we kind of stop seeing our uniqueness. The person who has, like Denise, somebody that's cared for somebody that's been sick for years and years and years. That's a story. They've got a story. They're courageous and they've put that time in and they were with somebody to the end. That's a story. The person like my mom that raised 2 kids on her own and worked 2-3 jobs sometimes. That's a story. The person who starts over after a divorce and builds a business from scratch. Somebody that coaches kids, that rescues animals. I mean, we've all got these different life stories that we need to think about. And maybe one of the useful things about being asked to explain yourself is that we're forced to take inventory, not in a bragging way, not in a, let me tell you how fascinating, I am, but just how unique and what cool experiences I've done. So I've done some things, I've survived some things, I've made some things, I have brought some things into the world that wouldn't exist if I hadn't done them, and all that matters. And I think we all need to occasionally be reminded of that. What have you created out there that wasn't there or wouldn't be there without you? This whole experience with this new project that I was working on got me thinking about someone memorable, not famous, but memorable. Those are not the same, being famous and being memorable. Plenty of famous people are not especially interesting once you scrape away the lighting and the editing. And there are plenty of ordinary people that are unforgettable. And I think we all know somebody that we would say, oh yeah, I know this guy. He is unforgettable. If you ever met him, you'd never forget him. But what is it? What makes that? What makes someone stick in your mind? I think it's usually a combination of two things. First, specificity. Generic people kind of blur together. Specific people stand out. And I think that is like something you got to think about. And again, there's going to be some people that don't care and they are fine being generic. But people like me that are trying to build followings and brands and do these different things, we've got to be thinking about what is specific about me that makes me stand out. And I wish everybody would think that. The guy who says I like music isn't really memorable. The guy who says, I believe the opening piano part of More Than a Feeling can reset a bad day. That's somebody we might want to get to know because he's more describing the song. A woman that says, I enjoy cooking. That's pretty generic, pretty blurred. But somebody that says, I make my grandma's chicken noodle soup every time it rains because that's what the weather was every time she cooked it. Then all of a sudden, you're smelling, you're hearing the rain, you're thinking of stories, and they're not as generic as everybody else. It's layering your stories with texture and the things that you do with different layers of texture. It's the difference between a cardboard cutout and a person. Second, I think memorable people have contrast. They're not just one predictable note. The serious businessman who collects vintage monster toys. That's kind of different. A tough coach who cries at dog videos. The grandmother who can beat anybody at poker. A soft-spoken librarian who used to race motorcycles. See how those are a contrast in different things? Contrasts make us all curious. It makes people curious about you. If you got some really visible contrast, it gives the mind something to hold on to. I've always been drawn to people like that, people who don't fit into just one box. And honestly, I think I'm probably one of those people that doesn't fit into a box. I run a local media company, but I also love retro art. I love oddball brands and goofy t-shirt ideas. I'm sentimental about the 1970s, but I'm also fascinated by AI and how it can help us in the future and help us things that we're doing. I could talk about monetizing a digital business 1 minute and then spend an hour thinking about the emotional power of Saturday morning cereal the next, because I've got that nostalgia vibe. But that's me. I think that's what makes me have a little bit of specificity and a little bit of contrast. I'm not saying that as a pitch. I'm saying that because this recent project that I was working on let me see myself a little more clear. Third, memorable people are usually willing to be seen. And I think that's a big one because some people and a lot of people are not willing to be seen. And so some of you may be rolling your eyes at this whole podcast, and you're probably the people that don't want to be seen, which is fine. And that's great. Some people are not always loud. They're not always extroverts. I'm not always loud. I'm not always an extrovert. But some people reveal something that maybe you don't know. They let you see that they care about something. They let you hear the enthusiasm in things that they do and in their voice. They let themselves be a little uncool. And I think that's a key right there. And I think it matters more than people realize when you're a little bit uncool. You're not always on point. You can flub things up. You can get things wrong. And the older I get, the less I'm impressed by people that seem above it all. You kind of start seeing through that as you get older. Give me the person who geeks out over what they love. Give me the person who has a weird hobby. Give me the person who gets excited over a great old record, a sunrise, that's me. A roadside attraction, that's me. A local diner, ridiculous novelty mug, or a memory from 1977, and somehow it still glows in their mind. And I think I'm describing myself here. But that person seems more alive than somebody that's kind of more generic. And you pay attention a little more to those people because they're a little more memorable. I hope that's sometimes what I get across, especially when I talk about the 70s. Now let's talk about the part that I think most people feel and do not always like to admit, and that's being chosen. And I'm going to admit it. I think we all like to be picked. The old days when you were playing kickball or dodgeball, you didn't want to be the last one picked or the one that never got picked. We can dress up all kinds of adult language, but underneath it, there's often a little kid in us who always wants to point and say, we want you. I think we all want to be picked. Pick me for the team. Pick my drawing to put up on the wall. Pick my song for the station. Pick my business for the job. Pick my idea. Pick my application. Pick my face out of the crowd. Pick my videos on TikTok. I think we've all got that hidden desire, even if you won't admit it. I think it's there. The desire does not completely go away just because we become adults and get over 60 years old. It changes clothes, maybe. It gets a little more sophisticated, but it's still there. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be picked, wanting to be chosen, wanting your stuff, wanting to be the person that completes the project. Nothing wrong with that. But pretending that we don't care at all is a different kind of trap, because sometimes we do care. Sometimes we do want the thing. Sometimes we do let our imagination imagine what the outcome would have been. And when it doesn't happen, it's kind of weird, I don't know how to describe it, basically disappointing. When I did get the decision, I will have to say that I was a little disappointed because I had all these things going on in my head about how this project would be so cool to do. So, but that's okay. I mean, rejection, disappointment, it's all part of life. And if you never feel disappointed, it means you've probably stopped reaching out and probably stopped putting yourself out there. Here's what I think is really hard for people, and it's not just the rejection, it's being seen wanting something. Because when you apply or you audition, or even like a lot of people audition for plays here at Gaslight and Enid, you're declaring, I want this. I think I'm the best person for this. And then someone comes along and says, no, we don't think you're the person for that. And that kind of puts you in a vulnerable position. It's much safer to stay on the sidelines and make jokes about everybody else doing it. It's much safer to say, I could have done that, but not ever actually trying. It's easier to dismiss the opportunity before you get a chance to dismiss it. But that kind of safety comes with a cost. You protect your ego maybe, but you also start shrinking from life. I think there's a real courage in being able to reach out. There's courage in putting your name out in the hat. There's courage in saying, I know I may not be the obvious choice. I know this may not happen. I know I could look silly, but I'm interested and I'm going to try anyway. That's no small thing to put yourself out there, especially as we get older, especially if we get older than 60, because age brings experience, yes, but it can also bring excuses. We start saying, I'm past that stage. It's for younger people. I don't need to prove anything. I had my chance. Why would they pick me? And then you start listening to those things and you start thinking that that's reality. Not every door is going to still be open. Not every dream is practical. Not every opportunity is worth pursuing, which I'm fine with, and I'm not going to pursue everything out there, just certain things. But I'm saying do not reject yourself too early, especially if you're over 60. Do not let other people say no for you. Do not assume that your age disqualifies you from every interesting thing. Don't decide that because something is unlikely, it's automatically foolish. Some of the most energizing things in life are unlikely. Like me applying for freaking extra positions in movies. I mean, you never know until you try. And I'm going to keep coming back to the fact that I'm 63. I know exactly how old I am. I don't wake up thinking I'm 27. I might think I'm 43 sometimes. Sometimes my back reminds me of the fact that I am 63, not very often. But mentally, creatively, emotionally, I don't feel like I'm done. I've got an easy 20 years left of doing all kinds of fun stuff. In some ways, I feel more like myself than I did at 33. I was trying to figure out who I was. At 33, I probably cared more about looking like I had things all figured out. At 63, I'm much more interested in whether something feels alive or not. Does it wake me up? Does it challenge me? Does it make a good story? Does it stretch some part of me that has gotten too comfortable? And I think that's one of the reasons I like to get out on the trail and keep that consistency and all that, because all that matters to me. I don't want the rest of my life to be a slow narrowing of possibilities. And I can tell you guys, the less you guys do, the less you stay active, the narrower it becomes and the less you're able to do. I can promise you that. I still want surprises. I still want to try for things and get surprised that I make them. I want to keep being the kind of person who will consider something improbable and say, well, why not? Why not start a new podcast? Why not write my book? Why not make a new brand? Why not submit an idea? Why not ask for a meeting with somebody that you don't think you could ever get? Walk into a room, act like you own the room. Why not take a shot at the thing that seems slightly absurd for a person of my age and your age? Now, if you're young and you're listening to this podcast or watching this, I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Same thing applies. Don't think you're too young. Don't think you don't have enough experience. I'm glad that I tried. It reminded me that I haven't mentally moved to the sidelines, and I think it's worth protecting that you're still out there in the game. There's a kind of internal aging that has nothing to do with birthdays, and it happens when our curiosity shuts down, when curiosity basically disappears, when we only do what is familiar and what's routine, when every answer becomes, nah, probably not. When people ask you to go do things, when people want you to go on vacations, when people want you to chase tornadoes, when people want you to chase eclipses. And I don't want that. I want to be the person that says, yeah, I want to remain available to what's going on in life. That phrase that comes to me that I like is remain available to life. Not desperate, not reckless, not chasing every shiny object, but available for things that come along. Open enough that when an unusual door cracks open, I can at least walk over and peek inside and think, I think I could do that. One thing this experience of this project made clear to me is that the outcome is not always the whole value of the experience. We all know that in theory, but it's hard to feel when you're in the middle of wanting a particular outcome. If you train for a marathon and you don't hit the time that you hope for, is the whole thing worthless? No, you still competed in a marathon. You become stronger. You've proved something to yourself and you've changed your habits. If you launch a business and it doesn't become what you hoped, was it a waste? No, I've done that with a lot of businesses. But you know what? I usually learn something every time a business fails. I learn how people respond to different business. I learn how to sell maybe a different way. I learned where my blind spots are. I learn whether I love what I was trying to do, or if it was just a fantasy that I thought it was something that I might love. If you go after an opportunity and don't get chosen, did nothing happen? No, something happened. You went for it. In my case, I had to articulate who I was. I had to think about what makes me distinct. I had to revisit my old stories from my life and ask why they matter. I had to imagine myself in a different setting and consider what version of me would show up there. I had to confront whether I still believe that I'm interesting enough, capable enough, and alive enough to step into something unexpected. At 63, that's a big question. That's not nothing, because it made me think. It was a worthwhile exercise just going for it. And as I suspect, a lot of people would rather benefit from doing some version of it even without the outside opportunity forcing the issue. Sit down sometime and ask yourself, what are the 5 stories from your life that say the most about you? What have you done that you routinely minimize about your life? What do people come to you for? What do they see you as an expert or a person that's passionate about? What do they think you're passionate about? What contradiction in you makes you interesting? What have you wanted to try but dismiss too quickly? Now I want to spend a little more time on this idea because I think it matters. You may be more interesting than you think, not because everyone is automatically fascinating in the same way, but we're all a little bit different. Some people really have allowed themselves to become boring through repetition, fear, and scrolling. But many people are not boring. You're not boring if you're watching this podcast. You're just simply unexamined. You haven't looked at your own life and your collection of stories yet. You haven't pulled the camera back far enough to see the shape of what has created you. You think because your life didn't happen under a spotlight, it might not be noteworthy. Well, it is noteworthy. We all have noteworthy lives. We all deserve to do the projects that we want to do. And that's what I'm telling you in this episode. You got to go for it. You can't do the project if you don't go for the project. Life does not need fame to be the narrative. It needs texture. It needs decisions. It needs moments of risk, humor, failure, absurdity, and persistence. And persistence is one of the main factors. Think about your own life. There's probably a story that you tell at dinner parties that always lands. There's probably a moment people cannot believe actually happened in your life. There's probably a job you had, a trip you took, a ridiculous relative, a crisis you handled, a strange neighbor, a bad date, a chance encounter, a childhood memory that would make a good scene in a movie. You just have to think about that. What is that? That stuff is what counts, that makes you different, and that's the stories people want to hear about. We all are curators of our own lives, whether we want to admit it or not. The stories that we choose to remember and repeat become part of our identity, and sometimes an unexpected opportunity makes us sort through those stories with a fresh urgency, and that's exactly what happened to me recently. This is the important part. Listen up. Not getting something isn't always the same thing as failing. Sometimes there are 1,000 reasons beyond our control that we don't get some of the things that we want. Timing, fit, chemistry, numbers, age, priorities, a whole bunch of different decisions. We can be qualified and still not get something that we go for. We can be interesting and still not get it. We can do everything right that we're supposed to do and still not get something. It's frustrating, but it's not that bad. Sometimes it can also be freeing because it opens us up. It means rejection is not always the verdict of our worth. Sometimes it's merely the outcome. I think we personalize some things too much. We hear no, and our brain instantly translate into we were not enough. And I promise you that's not even remotely how I'm feeling on this project. But but the real translation may be not this time, not this fit, not this configuration, not this exact moment, which is basically the reason we don't always get everything that we want, but you can't stop trying. That does not mean that you're off the hook from honest self-evaluation. Sometimes we do need to improve. Sometimes we misjudge our readiness. Sometimes we show up half prepared and call it rejection when it was actually consequences. And that's kind of what happened to me on a prior project. I went for a project not thinking I would get it. And when I was given a chance to get the project, I really wasn't as prepared as I thought I might be, and I didn't get the project. So if you're going to go for something, you got to try to be prepared. Other times, there's no grand lesson required. We took a shot, it didn't land, we move on, and life goes on. And that's what happened for me. I know that I participated, I tried for something, and so I would be kicking myself saying, what if I hadn't tried? Because a lot of us haven't tried. I've lived long enough now to know that some regrets fade quickly and others hang around. Email you never sent, an application you never submitted, a person you never asked out. Think about that. A trip you've never taken. Think about that. A creative project you keep planning but you never start. A business idea you've talked yourself out of before the world ever got a chance to react. Those regrets have teeth. Think about how many times you said, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to go see this person, and you don't. Those things stay unresolved, so you never get your answer. Fear always says the same thing. Don't do it. Stay safe. Avoid embarrassment. There will be another time. And then sometimes there's not. So I would rather collect a few clean disappointments than a closet full of question marks. At least disappointment has an ending, and it does. Question mark can follow you for years. And there are some things that I've early in life that I'm like, what if, not a lot, because like applying for the job to come to Enid, I didn't have the qualifications, but had I not applied for that job, I wouldn't have the life that I have today. And I might be sitting somewhere in a factory thinking, wow, what if I had sent in that resume and applied for that job? Well, I did. So here I am. So don't, even in your 60s, don't have regrets. So here's what I hope that you're going to take from this episode. First, don't underestimate your own story. Take another look at your life. There's more there than you think and more than you give your credit for. Second, do not reject yourself before the world even gets a chance to respond to you. If the idea matters to you, put it out there. It's not that big a deal. Let the answer come from reality, not from what you think might happen. Third, wanting something is not embarrassing. Caring is not embarrassing. Trying is not embarrassing. Getting your hopes up a little bit is not embarrassing. It means you're engaged with your own life. Even like starting a podcast. You may start a podcast and nobody may listen, but it doesn't matter because at least you tried. At least you got it out there. At least you put in the effort. 4, not getting the thing does not erase the value of going for it. The act of reaching can teach you something. It can clarify you. It can energize you. And it can reveal that you're still braver than you thought, which is kind of what happened to me. 5th, at whatever age you are, remain available to life. That may be the line that I remember the most from this episode. Remain available for life. Available for surprises, for changes, for adventure. That's my word, is adventure. For unexpected invitations. Be available to the idea that your most interesting chapter may not be behind you. It may be ahead of you. You may be the most interesting person in the room. You don't know. You got to believe that. I truly do. And maybe the best part of this whole recent experience for me, I did not get the thing. But I learned that I'm still the guy who's willing to go for it. And I'm the guy that wants to keep being the guy that goes for it. So in closing on this episode, if there's something sitting in the back of your mind right now, something you have half dismissed because you feel unlikely that it would happen, it's inconvenient, it's scary, it's a little outside your usual lane, maybe do not dismiss it quite so fast. Look into it. Ask yourself, why not me? Not in an entitled way, but in a open-hearted way, like, hey, I could probably be the guy for this. Why not you? Why not now? Why not at whatever age you are? Why not take the swing? You may get it. You may not. But either way, you will have done something alive. And that counts. It really counts. Okay, you guys, that is my weird little episode of going for it, getting rejected, trying to define who you are, what makes you unique, having a life in our third trimester, over 60 years old. I guess basically, I think this whole episode comes down to remain available for life. Don't get too comfortable. Don't get too caught up in your routine that you never put yourself out there. Write a song, write a story, start a podcast, start a business, apply for something. I want everybody, you guys, email me, Curtis@curtistucker.com, shags@shaggyduck.com. Try something. Within the next month, everybody's got to try something. You got to apply for something. And that's a kind of a cool thing, is the more things that you try and you apply for, it kind of gives you something to look forward to, because there's that anticipation of, am I going to get it? Am I not going to get it? And then your mind starts going, oh, wow, what if I do get it? My life's going to change. It's going to be wild. So it kind of energizes you. And I think the more you start doing it, the more you'll continue doing it. So anyway, appreciate you guys listening to my goofy little podcast. Hit me up, subscribe to the podcast. I'll get back to my normal self here pretty quick. And appreciate you guys. Love you. See ya.